NACDL is the association of the nation's criminal defense bar.
So we're going to start bright and early this morning and talk about some digital forensics. And I am really pleased to work today with Chris Wells. As Jeff just said, in November and then back in January, I'd had 2 back-to-back first-degree murder cases that had a lot of digital evidence in the case. And I was fortunate enough to work with Chris Wells, although at times we were forgetting which case we were working on because there were so many overlapping issues in the cases. How many of you are getting huge electronic discovery dumps in your cases? And when you get these things, sometimes it's either the U.S. Attorney's Office or the State District Attorney's Office will give you a hard drive with sometimes terabytes of discovery, oftentimes not in any kind of usable index. Is that something that happens to you all? I swear sometimes they just kind of just throw all this stuff in, or they go and then scan it and then give it to us. So what we're seeing now in 2019, we have call detail records, cell tower data, social media. How many of you are getting Facebook, Instagram, all of these things, right? Messaging apps, WhatsApp, Facebook, Snapchats, location information, GPS, and we'll talk a lot about that today. Pictures, surveillance, camera, poll cameras. How many of you have gotten hundreds of hours of poll camera? And it's like you almost like your IQ starts going down because you're just waiting. It's like watching the same thing over and over for the pearl happens in hour 37. Vehicle-derived OnStar navigation systems, computers, laptops, iPads. And the thing that we want to talk about today is don't put your head underground. And just for demonstrative purposes, that's me with my head underground. And so what we have learned in our relationship is that everyone in our team has a part. The lawyer has to understand what is the information that she or he is receiving. What information do I need to further my client's case, defense, to have a not guilty, acquittal, or to get some very good pretrial rulings? Working closely with the investigator, when you get this dump, I can say, please help me. This is the information we need. The investigator will try to look for that information, and then hiring the expert. Now, Chris Wells, on these cases, you knew the facts in general about the case. But when we're giving him huge, Celebrite dumps of Facebook records, of GPS records, cell tower data, he's like, so you're giving me all this data. What do you need from it? So we give him a little bit of information about the case, but we will ask him specific questions. Where is it, and how do we get that information? So I'm going to start with just a few kind of uplifting stories that Chris and I had in these 2 murder cases, where one case my client was convicted and one case my client was fully acquitted, right? So, but I can tell you that one of the things, even in the case where my client was convicted, a dear friend of mine once said to me, how we look at victories in this work is sometimes very different. And I think one of the greatest victories in the case where our client was convicted is that we were able to put on a really interesting show in front of the jury about cross-examining some of their, and I'm using a lot of air quotes today, experts. And that the client always knew that we cared deeply about his case and that we were going to go into the weeds and the minutia for our client. So the first one, and by the way, that's Perry Mason. My kids always say that my cultural references are dated. Does anyone remember Perry Mason? Thank you. All right, great. He was like a famous defense lawyer in the 60s, and he always had these aha moments in court. And so Chris and I were happy to say we had some aha moments in court. In every case that I have, I always try to interview the state's or the government's witnesses before trial. And I've been shocked at how often that we pick up the phone that they say, sure, we'll meet with you and we'll talk to you. I don't know if it's a Colorado thing. It happened in Washington State as well. But we really were very successful in speaking with someone, their witnesses. So for example, we had a lot of cell tower data that they were using, and their expert was Scott Eicher, who is a special agent with the FBI. Has anyone ever had cases with Eicher? Okay, so I see he's big in Colorado, and if you get his curriculum vitae, it's very, very impressive. He's an amazing, impressive witness. He is someone that you should be a little daunted by. And the question was that we said that we have this that we've got sector data. And this is the report that he gave us, his PowerPoint that he was going to be using pre-trial. And the murder cases, you can see here is where the red dot is. And he's on direct examination, he's never asked, where did the defendant live? He just says that we were tracking the calls, and the calls were hitting to these sectors. On the phone with him before trial, I asked him, were you ever asked to plot where the defendant lived? And he said no. And I said, well, if I tell you that he lived at 812 South Chambers Street, and I can give you the coordinates, and he said, no, I'll get the coordinates, and he pulls them up, and he said, oh yeah, that would be right around in this area. And the next question was, would you agree that all of those calls and text messages could have originated from Mr. Client's house? Yes. He could have been upstairs. He could have been downstairs. He could have been on the front porch. That's why he's grabbing to different cell tower sectors. But yes, he could have been sitting or standing in his home at the time. So for cross-examination, the state never asked you to plot where the defendant lived in relationship to where those sectors were. No. When given the defendant's address, Mr. Special Agent FBI, fabulous man, you would agree that all texts and calls could have been made from inside his home at that time. Yes. You cannot place the defendant at the crime scene based on those calls. No. Now, at the time that we're doing this cross-examination, my expert, and I'll talk about this in a minute, we always file motions to have the expert present in the courtroom. Mr. Wells is sitting in the courtroom, and I say to him, can you run outside and quickly make a diagram using the government's demonstrative and place our client's home there? Sure. So that's my nerdy, lovely Mr. Wells sitting in the courtroom. He runs outside and he creates a demonstrative, and he places where my client, Seth, was living, and it's in that area. We get a printout of it, we get it on our computer, and the last question for that special agent was, and you would agree that if that's where Mr. Seth was living, that's in the discovery, yes, and in fact all those calls could have been made at those scenes, and he may have never been anywhere near the crime scene at the time of the murder. That's correct. This was a some other dude did it, an alternate suspect case. The murder in this case is just that the decedent is in a car with a passenger. They've been drinking and drugging all day. They pull into a parking lot. The decedent is shot. You know, the car, boom, 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 7 or 8 shots into the car. He's shot he's killed very quickly. 1 shot went through his heart. A half hour after the murder, alternate suspect comes running into his girlfriend's house. Oh my God, I killed Flex, I killed Flex. The victim's name is Flex. I sold him drugs 2 days ago. He gave me a bunch of counterfeit money. I shot Flex. He's crying, and as one of the witnesses says, snot's coming out. He's very upset. I think I left some casings behind at the murder scene. He's saying this to his girlfriend and his girlfriend's roommate, who happens to be a confidential informant working with the Oregon District Attorney's Office. This is at 2 in the morning. The next morning, confidential informant is like 1-800 to his DA. Oh my God, this guy confessed to killing some dude named Flex last night, and he left behind some casings at the crime scene. So the alternate suspect is arrested quickly. And the confidential informant says the way that he communicated with his drug dealers was by way of iPad. And he always had his iPad on him. He'd make phone calls, he'd make drug deals. In fact, I used to use his iPad all the time to go try to find jobs. I would do my emails, I'd borrow his iPad and do emails on his iPad. We get an iPad dump. And the alternate suspect is interviewed by the police. I don't know anything about guns. I know nothing about drugs. I don't know who this confidential informant is. I don't know who this Aaron Hall, confidential informant, on my mother's grave. I know nothing. Don't know anything about that. That's what he says. So here's where Chris comes in. We get this huge dump, celebrate reader on the iPad information. And we say things like, we need to find out, A, is there any discussion about guns? Is there any discussion about drugs? And most importantly, are there any emails from the CI on that iPad? What Chris did is sat down with me, my investigator, my co-counsel on the case, Rebecca Higgs, who's one of the finest lawyers in the country. She was on the Holmes case where they walked, no, they didn't walk. He didn't get life, the theater shooting in Colorado. But what they did is that, the three of us, Rebecca, my investigator Nova, Chris and I sat in a room, and Chris taught us, New Jersey accent, how to use a UFED reader to go through all of this information on the iPad. And within a very short period of time, we were able to find out using keywords and strokes. We found dozens of emails from Aaron Hill that were on the iPad. We found references to drug deals, guns, etc. It was very powerful for that portion of the trial. We get a Facebook dump. It was not scrutable. It was not in what was it called?
HTML.
HTML. But we made the PDF scrutable. There is no connection between my client and Flex, except that my client's DNA and fingerprints were found on the murder weapon at the crime scene, on the gun, in the magazine, and on the bag right next to where the dead dude is. It's not a good fact. But there was really no connection to my client and the victim, and we found out that the gun that was used in the murder was a community gun. It was touched by at least 10 different people. The government knew this because they interviewed everyone in the week before the murder. So I have a gun, it's going from here to here to here. We knew that these magazines were interchangeable. So we were able to work with the DNA evidence in a way that was like, so what? But what about the connection between Flex? The prosecution says we found a Facebook posting that says that about flexing. And when I want to talk to you and it's not scrutable, this is what everyone recognizes Facebook, right? So this is on my Facebook feed. It says Colette Tvedt. It gives the date. If you love Nola, an artist, my daughter, Kelsey Skoll's podcast. So it's my name. It has what the subject line is. It's got the photographs, and then it has responses, thumbs up. Right. So we recognize Facebook, right? When you get it in Discovery, it doesn't look like this. So my client on his Facebook, horrible, inscrutable ridiculousness, it says, why are you always flexing? And this is what the government says. And if you look at it, it has the date of January 20th, 2017. It has a link that says image and the same time that it coordinates with that. But the image that is with that why are you always flexing is not there. So on direct examination, the lead detective says, we found that there was a connection between this man and the decedent. Why are you always flexing? Flexing is a referral to the victim. It was posted around the 6-month anniversary of Flex's death. The defendant is sending a message out to the community. Cross-examination. As an experienced officer, you would agree that flexing has a different meaning in the Merriam-Webster and the Urban Dictionary, yes. As an experienced officer, did you look what the definition was? Yeah, I checked it out in Urban Dictionary. It means, you'd agree, showing off your valuables in a non-humble way. To stunt or show off is used by many rappers in songs. This is from by many rappers in various songs. As far as urban slang, the definition is to show off, all right? And he says yes. You'd agree that the hip-hop lyrics, you're familiar with hip-hop lyrics like Post Malone. The song title is Go Flex. Man, I just got to go flex. Gold on my teeth and on my neck. I'm stone cold with the flex. Rich Homie Quan, flex, ooh, ooh, ooh. I ain't got a flex, boy. I ain't got a ooh, ooh, ooh. We found 36 rap songs or hip hop songs that uses the word flex. The jury afterwards said, we did 8 of them in front of the jury. You had us at 2. You didn't have to do 8. But it was kind of funny seeing you like crossing this cup, ooh, 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 flexing. And every day after court, I would say to my client, today was a good day. And today was a good day. So cross-examination on this, detective, you aware that there was another historical event that occurred on January 20th, 2017? Does anyone know what happened on January 20, 2017? It was a little bit of a historical day. Hints, Trump inauguration, January 20, 2017. Do you remember the pictures that were being posted on social media about the inauguration pictures? And he says, I think so. And the actual posting that my client posted about why you always flexing, that's what it was. A picture speaks 1,000 words, Obama, Trump, and then the woman that he's communicating with, Kazia, says, why are you always flexing? And then she says, LMFAO, your caption though, and he has little smile emojis. That is what came in on cross-examination of the lead detective. That's me with the jury. That's what they're thinking, and that's the officer. Sorry, that was like a not real officer, but you get that. I didn't want to like put the real officers, but I should have. I didn't have a picture of them. I did try. So the thing is that when you get these cases, and there's a lot of forensics, when you're getting whether it's digital stuff, if you're getting social media stuff, if you're getting cell tower information, and then in this particular case, my client was on a GPS monitor. It was a series of burglaries with 4 people, and 2 of the 4 were on GPS monitors, including my client. I live and work in the state of Colorado. We are now in bail reform. Instead of release without cash bail, they're putting everyone on ankle monitor. So it's becoming a real issue in case after case after case. Chris and I are getting calls all the time. So so I didn't know much about how the GPS monitor worked. So I had to start thinking about it and studying about it myself and finding out how does the ankle monitor work. We got all of these spreadsheets with the name of the client, the number of the GPS ankle monitor, latitude, longitude, miles per hour, and an address. And I'm like, what does all this stuff mean? So I end up picking up the phone and calling, and it's produced by a company called BI, and the ankle monitor is the ExecuTrack 1. So I call the senior product manager, Jim Buck, and say, I'd like to talk to you. So he says, sure, come over. So my co-counsel, my investigator, and I drive to their headquarters, AKA compound in Boulder. And he welcomes us in. We have to give up all of our electronic devices. We have a pen and paper, and we meet with him. And he's talking about how GPS works, and he's showing us, he's got a big PowerPoint that he's showing us. He's saying, I said, are you using any demonstratives in this case? And he says, oh yeah, I just wrote to the DA today. Here's the email to the DA, and I'll show you, I'll walk you through the demonstratives that we're using at trial. And Chris is going to talk more about this, but you see can you see those little green dots? Chris is going to talk to you about this, but he's now tracking my clients, where he's going on the day of the murder. And all these little green dots, and that's like in a wide picture of Denver. And then this is the actual murder scene in a suburban urban area. And you see one thing that becomes critical in this case is that the dots are the same size. So you go from Denver, looking over like a bird looking over, and now we are here at the crime scene, and that's the location, and that's my client. Those little green dots, he says are where my client is, and that's the whole. And that seemed to be a problem, right? Because they got him like on top of the house, inside the house, around the house. And one other fact about the case is that this is the last burglary of the night. Co-defendant has a gun. They go into the house. They go down the stairs. There's the son that's in the basement, 30-year-old son. And he comes running out. Co-defendant, boom, 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 shoots him. My client says, I'm on ankle. What the hell? He says, you gonna snitch? My client's like, what are you doing? Boom. The co-defendant shoots my client in the basement. My client's DNA is all over the basement. So we couldn't say what's with the GPS? My client, they got his DNA in the crime scene. That's not a good fact. So I started to do some research on it and on the company, and I found out that the company had been under fire in areas like Wisconsin, where they were using cell tower information to locate the people that were on ankle monitoring. Is that the correct verbiage? Okay. And in some of the rural areas in Wisconsin, the clients were being found in violation and put in jail because they couldn't connect cellularly to the towers, and they were going to jail even though they were in compliance. And still, they upped the multi-million-dollar contract to get more of these out there. So I was like, does that seem bad to you guys? You know, they're going to jail and they're not even doing anything wrong because the cell ankle is not working. So I needed to understand GPS and location technologies, and I needed to hire someone. I need to hire a competent, confident expert. I was put on the listserv. Has anyone used an ankle monitoring expert? I went on local listserv. I went on the NACDL, Cardoza, National Forensic College listserv. I got a bunch of names. I got Chris's name. I got his curriculum vitae. I wanted to find out, had he been qualified before, testified before, state or federal, pretrial or trial? Were there transcripts from it? And so I had to vet him. I had to talk to other lawyers about him to find out whether or not they've used Chris in any capacity before. And I needed to make sure that he could not be impeached, because we have all been burned on experts, right? So I wanted to make sure, is there anything in this guy's background that would hurt us? And there was not, that I know about. So I interviewed him, and I think all of us as lawyers have to do one critical thing. I like Chris. He's his curriculum vitae, aerospace, he's amazing. But he's also someone that comes to the stand with integrity. He's not just going to answer a question if the prosecutor's going to ask him a question about, well, did you look at all these other records? No, I wasn't asked to. Can I take a moment, or we can take a break? He'll never just answer, fly by the seat of his pants. And that's really important, because we do not want. How many of us have had those experts where they are, Yale, Harvard educated, and they come across as being somewhat, you know what I mean, right? And what I really want is this. I want someone that's credible, knowledgeable, relatable, and persuasive. Does everyone recognize who that is? Thank you. We have a group here of a lot of wisdom. That's what my friend says, that some gravitas. And so I was fortunate to work with Chris Wells, and now I'm going to turn it over to Chris Wells, because he was someone with a tremendous amount. His background was incredibly impressive, and anytime that you see that he's got his education, BS in aerospace engineering, I was blessed to find Mr. Wells. We worked very well together. We'll talk about how that's important to have collaboration in the relationship.
Thanks, Colette, certainly for the kind words. So when Colette came to me and said, I want you to be my ankle monitor expert on this case, I said, I'd love to. I appreciate the offer. By the way, I don't know anything about ankle monitors.
It ultimately works out really well.
But I have an academic history in aerospace engineering, so I learned a lot about satellites, about locations and how to map them on the surface of the Earth, about analyzing accuracy of scientific measurements. And in my previous life, before I started doing mainly forensics work, I did about 25 years in the field of software development. And a lot of that work was for government scientific agencies, specifically focused on GPS, on atomic clocks, which provide the basis for the accuracy of GPS, and also locating information on the surface of the Earth, figuring out where something is. So I managed to convince Colette that made me somebody that had the foundation for understanding ankle monitors. But at the same time, I was going to have to spend some time coming up to speed on the ankle monitors specifically. The things at the bottom of this slide are mainly the work that I do right now. But I'm still not an ankle monitor expert. I learned a lot thanks to Colette, her patience, and her willingness to let me just spend the time learning about this particular piece of technology. And on every case since then, I've learned a lot more as well. So if you're looking at my background here, my academics, and what my current job is, if you're questioning whether I have any reasonable social skills, not so much. So what I did was just jumped on Google and started doing some searches about BI, the company, and also this piece of technology called the ExacuTrack 1. And these are pictures of what it looks like. The things that I gleaned as part of my research, really two important things. One is that the ankle monitor has a GPS receiver on board of it, so it can figure out where it is, just like your phone uses GPS. And it also has cellular connectivity, meaning it can transmit and receive signals just like your cell phone can. So what the ankle monitor does is figure out where it's located, and it phones home to BI to tell BI where the ankle monitor is. A few other interesting tidbits that didn't have anything to do with Colette and I's case. The strap on this ankle monitor can actually detect if it's been tampered with. If it gets tampered with, if it gets cut, it phones home to BI and says, hey, you might want to pay attention to this. And there's also a speaker on the ankle monitor so that the monitoring agency can send pre-recorded messages to the ankle monitor that the person wearing it can hear.
Have you ever been in court where some of the witnesses on the stand, it's like battery low, battery low, battery low? That's happened twice recently. That's one of the messages.
So to understand the issues about the ankle monitor and how accurate it can be, which is at the core of Colette and I's work on this, you got to know just a little bit about GPS. I'd love to spend a couple of hours talking about it, but I'm going to spend about 30 seconds. So GPS is a constellation of satellites that orbit around the Earth. There's at least 24 of them. And what they do is send down a signal, and that signal contains the information that allows a GPS receiver, which is in the dashboard of your car, is in your cell phone, is in your Garmin handheld that you might use if you hike or camp. That signal provides the information that the GPS receiver needs to compute a latitude and longitude. The GPS constellation of satellites is designed so there's always 4 satellites above the horizon, wherever you are and at whatever time of day you are. Now, there's a difference between a satellite being above the horizon and it actually being visible to the GPS receiver. Imagine that you're at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. You've got huge rock walls on either side of you. The only place you can see the sky is directly above you. So satellites that might be out on the horizon are not going to be visible, only the ones that are directly overhead. The general rule in GPS is the more visible satellites that the GPS receiver can see, the better the accuracy is. It's not an absolute fact, but that's the trend. The real most important key takeaway in what I brought to the table here is this foundational fact. A GPS receiver estimates location. It's not perfect. It doesn't say Chris Wells is now standing at this particular point on the stage. It says, Wells is somewhere in this general area. The idea of an estimate is that it's a best guess as to the ankle monitor's location, and then an accuracy, an error associated with that computation. These are 3 screenshots from different GPS devices. The one on the left is from an app that's on my smartphone. It gives you a latitude and longitude. And then down below in the red box, the GPS app tells you what the accuracy of that latitude and longitude is. In this case, plus or minus 33 feet. Similarly, in the middle, that is the screen on an emergency locator beacon that can be used in the backcountry. Again, it tells you a latitude and longitude and an accuracy, plus or minus. Far right is an old Garmin handheld unit. Same thing, latitude, longitude, and an accuracy. So the question is, how do you interpret this accuracy in the context of this best guess that the GPS receiver is making? The accuracy number means that within plus or minus 17 feet or 33 feet of the best guess is the actual location on the surface of the earth of that GPS receiver. That's truth. Visualizing that can be a little troublesome though. If you've ever used the navigation system in the dashboard of your car, or Google Maps, or Apple Map, Waze, any of those kinds of pieces of software, you've probably seen a picture that looks like this. The blue dot in the very middle is where the computer is saying you're located, your car, for instance, if you're driving down the street. And the fuzzy blue circle around that, that's the accuracy. So let's say this is Google Maps. What Google Maps is saying is that we're pretty sure you're at the dead center of the dark blue dot, but the light blue shaded area is where your car could be. So in this example, if you happen to be driving down 34th Street and the GPS is actually showing here that you're on the sidewalk, well, you're in the car on the street. You know you're not on the sidewalk, but it's the light blue bigger circle that indicates where you actually are. So the fact that it's showing you on the sidewalk is representative of the accuracy or the inaccuracy. You're really in the middle of the street. Looking at it another way, if you're walking down the sidewalk parallel to 34th Street here, and your GPS shows you as not being in the road, it's pretty darn accurate. You're on the sidewalk. So, important takeaway here, the radius of the circle that's drawn around the center point is the best guess, that radius is the accuracy of the GPS. To give you a little idea of how these accuracies play out in real life, I used some satellite photos of a country club not far from where I live, just to give you something that you know the approximate size of, which is a tennis court. If the accuracy was 0 feet, it would be a pin, a push pin on a map. There's no inaccuracy, so it would be a point. And I placed that point almost on the service line at the tee of this tennis court. So what if the accuracy was plus or minus 6 feet? How big is that? So I'm about 6 feet tall. That's about a 6 foot, 6 foot circle. And that's what you're seeing here. So you can be pretty sure that the person is right in the middle of this tennis court. How about 17 feet of accuracy? That's about half a tennis court. So if your GPS receiver said it believes you're at the center of this red circle, the interpretation of that is you're somewhere on that half of the tennis court. How about 164 feet? Well, you're somewhere in this country club, but can't be very much more specific than that. I used 164 feet in this slide because 164 feet is actually 50 meters, and 50 meters is the required accuracy for emergency 911 calls made from a cell phone. So in the context, if you call 911 on your cell phone, you're telling the responders, he's somewhere within this country club. That was all general background about GPS and GPS accuracy. Colette provided me a lot of the discovery materials that came from BI that were relevant to this case. This is the actual spreadsheet that came from BI. The columns that you see, for the most part, are self-explanatory. On the left is the name of the client, the event date in local time, in Colorado time, the date and time that the GPS receiver on the ankle monitor estimated its location, latitude and longitude columns, a number of satellites column. Like I mentioned before, the number of satellites used by the GPS receiver is a general indication of how accurate it might be. There's a speed column. The ankle monitor's moving. That column is going to tell you how many miles per hour. And then finally, an address column. That's the street address that's assigned by BI once they get the latitude and longitude. The ankle monitor doesn't know anything about addresses. So when I looked at this spreadsheet, talked to Colette, and she said, I'd like to see if BI has plotted the ankle monitor locations correctly. So can you plot these yourself? And I said, sure. But what's the problem with this spreadsheet? There's no accuracy column. So how big do I draw the dots on my map? I don't know. So I went back to Colette and said, we need to know how accurate each one of these ankle monitor location estimates is. So let's go ask BI if they can provide that information. Colette sent that request off to BI through the prosecution. And here's what BI provided in response. This is my interpretation of it. BI said that 50% of the time, the ankle monitor is accurate to within plus or minus 6 feet. 98% of the time, it's accurate to within 17 feet, half tennis court. There's a huge caveat about these accuracy specifications. These accuracy specifications from BI are only applicable in what's called an open sky environment. It says it right on the document that comes from BI. There's lots of scientific technical jargon surrounding it, but it says open sky environment, which raises the question, what's an open sky environment? It's like being in a Kansas cornfield. You can see horizon to horizon. There's nothing over your head but blue sky. There's no cars, there's no buildings, nothing to block the visibility of the satellites that are overhead. Any of you guys have crimes committed in this kind of location? Related to that open sky environment are the factors that decrease GPS accuracy. This excerpt is from the government GPS website, straight from the horse's mouth. A couple of factors that they claim are the most important in decreasing GPS accuracy: buildings, bridges, and trees, indoor or underground use. Both of those previous, the buildings, bridges, trees, indoor, or underground, there's something above your head that's obscuring the signal. It's not visible directly. And then finally, if there's buildings or walls in the vicinity of the GPS receiver, those can reflect the signal so it doesn't come directly from the satellite to the receiver. It bounces off something and then finds its way to the receiver. That's called multipath in technobabble. You notice that open sky environment doesn't have any of these factors. There's no buildings, there's no trees, there's nothing for signals to bounce off on, and you're above ground. So then I started looking at the demonstrative that BI had provided. Colette provided the video and played that. This is a zoomed in version of the crime scene. You can see the green dots that BI draws that come around the house where the crime scene is, and then they seem to go inside. They go under the roof. So that's the information that BI provides that I had to work with. I got curious why they're drawing the dots that size. And what size are they? What accuracy do they represent? Down in the lower right of that map, it's a Google map, it tells you what the scale of the map is. What distance on the map represents how many feet, 50 feet in this example. So given that little ruler, I can take those green dots and line them up inside that map scale and figure out how big the dots are drawn in feet and determine what BI is representing as the GPS receiver's accuracy per that scale. BI thinks that those dots have an accuracy of 3 feet, which isn't what they said was the most accurate you could get in their accuracy specification. So I thought that was a little bit curious that they would be that aggressive. You'll also notice that all those dots are the same size. Colette commented on this as well. That indicates that the accuracy on all of these location estimates is the same. They never change. For instance, when you go from outside the house, where you should have better visibility of the sky, to inside the house, where you have a roof above you, which would obscure the signal and presumably cause the accuracy to go down. So second observation, there's no variation in accuracy on these dots. And this sure doesn't look like an open sky environment to me. It's a neighborhood street. There's trees, there's cars, there's buildings, there's roofs. So I got my dander up about what BI was doing here. And that was actually a really fun part of Colette and I's collaboration on this, was being able to offer ways to challenge what BI was presenting from my technical perspective. It's nice when a tech guy like me can be practical. So let me summarize everything that I've covered so far, and these are the kinds of things that I needed to brief Colette on in terms of how we move this forward in terms of the ankle monitor data and what they mean. So GPS receivers do estimates, they're not exact. The accuracy of each of those estimates varies from moment to moment. Where the ankle monitor is impacts how accurate the ankle monitor receiver can be. And that accuracy determines how big you draw the circles on the map. Those are the fundamentals. Things from BI, their accuracy spec, only good in an open sky environment. They don't comment on the accuracy of the receiver on their ankle monitor in anything other than an open sky environment. They don't provide per estimate accuracies in their spreadsheet. And they're just pulling stuff out of places for how big they draw their circles. This is the information that I needed to pass on to Colette, and I'm going to turn the talking stick back to her at this point.
So he had to come to my office and teach me how does this stuff work. And we sat in my conference room, and we had whiteboards for about 4 hours. I didn't graduate with a degree in mathematics or statistics, biology, chemistry, like many of us as criminal defense lawyers. So he had to really use this to explain to me what this meant. And you see the size of the circle. So it may be that as the client was in the car coming down the street, at one point there's not a lot of, there might be buildings here, so the circle radius is bigger. As it gets closer to the house, the circles may get smaller if there's less impediments. The issue was my client's defense was that this was a duress defense. and that my client went into the house thinking that there was no one home. They were going to do a quick burglary, and within 5 minutes, the co-defendant had killed the person that lived there, had shot my client, and he ran out. And my client was outside the house in the car, bleeding pretty badly. And so we wanted to say, even though he may be, the GPS shows him in that general area, he wasn't in the house for 40 minutes, as the government wanted to state. So we had to show that these tiny little circles, and in the BI map, their demonstratives, how big the circle was, how big that green map was a pull-down menu. You could have a small, medium, or large circle. And in this case, they chose to use the small green dots. Chris wanted to explain to me, what does this mean? So we got the GPS diagnostic on my phone. And this is what it looks like. It gives you the latitude, longitude. It gives you how many satellites you're connecting to. Green is that it's a strong signal. And that was really important because it made me understand what does it mean, because for the next several hours in my office, I just kept walking around with this app. And the conference room is all glass. We're in the 16th Street Mall in Denver. But I would grab several satellites if I was standing by the glass. When I walked towards where the elevator bank was, where there's lots of cement, it might have gone from plus or minus 9 feet or meters? Meters, to something like 14 feet or 65 meters. So we're literally, I could see him. Chris might be where the gentleman where you are in the orange shirt. So I'm standing here, and my circle is gigumundous, right? It's really big because there's so many obstructions. But then when I come to where you are by the glass, my circle got smaller. So I could understand that. What was really interesting is if you look at this, I literally stood by the glass at one point, and I wasn't moving. The longitude and latitude were pretty close to each other, and within a minute, from 2 minutes, 10:41 to 10:43, it went from 214 feet to 106 feet. No satellites to 3 or 4 satellites. I didn't move. So my circle, standing straight, got much larger, right? And so that's important for me to understand that the radius was that they knew that I was somewhere within that circle, but just by the way of what we were grabbing from the satellites, the circle changed in that moment.
It was so cool to see Colette nerd out on this. She gets the honorary propeller head
Oh,
hat.
I totally love that. I would totally wear that. Thank you. All right. So I totally nerded out on this stuff, right? So does this spin? Okay. And so when I'll wear this hat for the next minute because I was obsessed with it. I had gone to the murder scene, and before I had my GPS little tracker on my phone, and then I would go home every night. And as I was driving home, I'd go through my alleyway, and I'd stop and I'd look at my GPS. It's like, and then I go into the front of my house. I have a small house, and the circle was much smaller behind my house, for whatever reason, and in the front of my house, it was much larger. So I kind of really understood the concept, like this is really critically important because they're claiming that he's in the house for this whole time and he's not. So we filed a Daubert motion. And I wanted to make clear to the judge, we're not challenging GPS. We know my client was in the house because his DNA is there, he got shot. We're not taking on all GPS. But what I'm challenging is these demonstratives. I'm taking down the green dots. And so we were trying to work saying that it's not scientifically valid what BI is representing because there's no accuracy that is being placed on their coordinates and on their spreadsheets. We do not know where in that area my client may have been during the course of a critical period of time. So we're working with Wells to prepare the motion. So I wrote the Daubert motion, but he's actually, not only is he an aerospace engineer, he actually can read and write very well. So I gave him my Daubert motion.
What are you laughing at?
Don't you be shaking my head about my expert. But he was saying, no, this is what, you be precise in your language. And then he said, and I think the judge should have some inserts that will show exactly what we mean and why it's so critically important. And we know that the judge is the gatekeeper under federal rules of 702 and 403. And the judge was like, Ms. Tvedt, GPS, I'm sure you've got a GPS in your phone. I'm like, yes, I am not taking on GPS. I'm taking on the damn dots. That's what I'm trying to say, that this is misrepresenting where my client was. And what do you think the response was? It was denied. And so we got to, but the judge says you can cross-examine on this. The day before trial, I get the full amount of exhibits. And one thing that was really critical that Chris and I were talking about is we need to show the jury the importance of this. So when do we know where the times where we know that the client is in a certain place and that the radius might be different? And we came up with two things. My client is shot in the hand. He kept charging his ankle bracelet because he knew that the cops are going to come talk to him, and he wanted to say, listen, it wasn't me with the gun. I had no idea he was going to shoot him. I got shot. Turns out that in Colorado, that's the definition of felony murder. I'm a burglar, not a murderer. And the other thing is that we knew that for 6 hours, my client was in the bowels of the Denver Police Department giving a confession. And so we knew that his ankle monitor was in the bowels of the Denver Police Department from 6 p.m. until 1 in the morning, and that's when they cut the ankle monitor off. This is where it starts getting a little fun.
Colette provided me a different spreadsheet than we had received before. And to summarize a little bit of what Colette just said, we knew that the ankle monitor was in a specific location. We were curious, given that we knew truth, where the ankle monitor was at the Denver Police Department. Let's look at the dots, let's look at the latitudes and longitudes from BI and see how those vary, because we know it's inside the building at this point. It's not an open sky environment. And let's see how much the best guesses wander around. So this is an excerpt of the spreadsheet we received the day before trial. What's highlighted in the black box is the moment, 6 p.m., when the ankle monitor went from outside on the street, outside the Denver Police Department, inside. And then the next locations all the way down almost to the bottom is when the ankle monitor is known to be inside the bowels of the Denver Police Department. So 6 p.m., outside the Denver Police Department, inside the Denver Police Department, and then finally back outside again. So I started taking a look at this and realized, well, we've got two different segments. One is ankle monitor outside in a more open sky environment. Another where the ankle monitor is inside, not so much open sky environment at all. So I noticed that the number of satellites went to 0 when the ankle monitor was inside the Denver Police Department. Well, if the GPS receiver is not seeing any GPS satellites, how is it computing latitude and longitude? That's curious. And also, the frequency of the ankle monitor's phoning home changed. When it was outside, it was doing it about once a minute. Once it went inside, I'll show over here, it switched to more like 30 minutes or so. So something happened when the ankle monitor went inside. I remembered from all the marketing material and technical information that I could find via Google from BI that the ankle monitor, because it has a cell phone on board, supports something called AFLT mode, Advanced Forward Link Trilateration, for those of you who are taking notes.
You don't need to know that.
The no quiz after. That's cell tower triangulation.
That's what you need to know.
Cell phone pings is what you commonly hear. That's where the location of a cell phone can be determined by how far it is from cell towers that are in its vicinity. So the ankle monitor switched how it operates when it was inside the basement of the Denver Police Department. No GPS signal, so it started relying on cell tower pings to figure out its location. And because we don't have an accuracy column in these spreadsheets, there's no indication to attorneys or investigators that something fundamentally different applies to these location estimates. They're not GPS estimates. So I produced two quick examples for Colette that showed what this new spreadsheet represents. The first is when the ankle monitor was known to be outside. And it's really hard to see. I've drawn some blue dots as the ankle monitor is heading down the street and then is outside the Denver Police Department, which is right here. So Denver Police Department is right here, blue dots going down the street and being right outside the Denver Police Department right before the ankle monitor went inside and then immediately after it exited the DPD. And just for correctness, I drew these dots with a plus or minus 17 feet accuracy because that's what BI says in an open sky environment, most of those accuracies are. So then I drew the latitude and longitude circles when the ankle monitor was known to be inside the Denver Police Department.
It gets fun.
That's the Denver Police Department. That's the Denver Police Department. Cell tower pings are much more inaccurate than GPS. I drew these circles at 50 meters, 164 feet, because like I had talked about previously, that's the required accuracy for emergency 911 on a cell phone. But we don't actually know what the accuracy of these readings are. But clearly the center of the circle shows that these are egregiously inaccurate, nowhere close to the Denver Police Department. And with that, I handed it back to Colette.
Okay, so now we're getting ready for examination of the expert, and he's on the stand for about an hour. I had filed a motion to allow Chris Wells to be present in the courtroom, which, you know, for most of us it's not a problem, but just prophylactically it's important to do. And so what we started to do for the cross of the expert, and before we started crossing the expert, Chris Wells, because we had such a good rapport and we had collaborated so much, we're like in high school, he's passing me notes while the expert is on the stand. And within the first 2 minutes of the senior project manager is on the stand, he gets longitude and latitude wrong. You know, and Chris is passing me a note. He says latitude is north-south, longitude is east-west. He got that absolutely fundamentally wrong, or I thought he wrote something else about the fundamental, but he got that wrong. And so one of my first questions is, you know, sir, with all due respect, you got latitude and longitude wrong. And he said something to the effect of, oh yeah, I often get that confused. That should not give you a lot of strength in his testimony. And then I said, you know, and you recognize that with this type of ankle monitoring, there could be obstructions or factors that create errors in perceived locations. Whether or not there's mountains, that's correct. Sometimes weather, yes. Buildings, yes. Trees, yes. That can all impact whether or not the radius is bigger or smaller. He agrees with that. And you told us that BI was testing its measurements in an open sky area. When we met, you told us that you did the open sky on the building in Boulder, which we went to, which is in a really pretty open area. The Executrek 1 ankle monitor was placed on top of the building, like like a chimney or something, and that's where you did the open sky environment testing to get these results. That's correct. But you also provided, when I asked you about have you tested any of this stuff, and you gave us a chart. And if you can see the green section on the chart where it says GPS on both of these, that if you're in a rural area, the readings are pretty accurate. But it starts going down as you're in a suburban area, an urban area, and a dense urban area. You stopped even calculating or doing any type of testing because there's simply so many of these big distractors. You chose, when you made these green dots, to make them a certain size, and you would agree that this area in which the murder took place was in a suburban / dense, slightly dense urban area. And yet you put all of the green dots within the same size using that drop down, what's the word I'm looking for? The drop down?
Drop down menu.
Menu, that's correct. I want to talk to you about an open sky area. An open sky area would be like a Kansas field, a cornfield, where there's no obstructions. That's correct. So you would agree that if John Denver was playing his guitar singing Take Me Home Country Road in an open air environment in Kansas, the circle around Mr. Denver would be very small, about 5.34 meters or 17 feet, and that's what you've been validating your ExecuTrack 1 in an open sky environment. Yes, that's correct. Let's just hypothetically, what if John Denver, then he finishes singing in the cornfield, and then he decides that he wants to go to the mall that's 2 miles away, and he wants to sing in the center of the mall. And here there's a lot of obstructions. There might be concrete, there might be other mountains, or it's a more urban area. And so the circle around Mr. Denver might be much larger, about 106 meters or 686 feet. That's correct. So that you would agree that when you're trying to make these determinations about accuracy and radius, you have to take into consideration what the environment in which you're calculating these radiuses is. Yeah, that's true. And in one point, at the murder scene, when we have the calculations with latitude and longitude, you have my client here for several minutes, and then at some point, he drops back across the street, down the street, and then literally a minute later, he's back over here. Well, I can't really explain that. But you would agree that since no accuracy, you have no idea where at the crime scene, where Mr. Smith was at the crime scene and whether he was in the house the whole time. That was critical. And he had to say yes. So the next point is that Chris starts sending me notes saying, I want to, Larry Posner says never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Do you ever get you're in a groove in court, though, you've been doing this a while, and you figure, now I might ask some questions I may not know the exact answers to? And he was getting very red in his face. So so Chris is passing me a note to ask about accuracy issues. And I said, well, what about, the spreadsheets have the number of satellites, and you have testified on direct examination that the more satellites, the better or the more accurate it is. Well, what is the accuracy rate with 4 satellites? And I don't have the transcript. And he said, oh, well, at four satellites, that's about X meters. And then 5 to 7, it's about Y meters. And then 8 to 10 satellites, I'd say it's about Z meters. And that's based upon my experience. And I said, well, you're saying based upon your experience, but there's been no validation studies similarly to this open sky that you did on all of these different areas and with different numbers of satellites. That's correct. Then he gets really selfish. The question is, ask him, has the Denver Police Department ever required BI to record accuracy? Just ask him that question. Because you think that the police and the pretrial services would really want accuracy? Sir, has Denver Police Department ever required BI to record accuracy? Answer, no, the police do not require accuracy. That's our exploding emoji heads. Chris is like, what? I was like, what? The police don't want accuracy? And then the next question that Mr. Wells wanted me to ask was, what type of chip is in the ExecuTrack 1 ankle? Is it a commercial GPS module, or is it built in-house? And then he goes on and he says, he gives the exact model. It's a commercial one. He gives, what's the name of it?
The Qualcomm 6055.
The what? The Qualcomm 6055. Chris goes on Google. and finds out about that. And he said, well, that would be very concerning to me because if the police knew how inaccurate the ankle monitoring was, that could impact multi-million-dollar contracts with law enforcement all over the country. I started to ask that question, and they objected. It was sustained. Then I wanted to talk about the fact that you've got multi-million-dollar contracts all over the country. Sustained, but don't worry about that. And then I said, so he's on the stand for 2 hours, and it's really clear he's like getting boxed in on some of these questions. I wanted to go back to the 0 satellites. And so I said, we talk about, the accuracy of where Mr. Smith was at all points, including at the time of the murder. But one thing we know is that at 6 p.m., he entered the Denver Police Department, and he was taken into an interrogation room in the basement of the Denver Police Department. And sir, you would agree that there were 0 satellites, and for the time period that he was in the Denver Police Department being interrogated. And he was like, yeah. And I said, but you're still recording latitude and longitude and location. Can you explain that to the jury? We know that he was inside the Denver Police Department interrogation from 6 p.m. to 12:35 a.m. His monitor was working. He never left, never ever left. He didn't even take a bathroom break. He was in that room the whole time on video. And yet, according to your company's data, he appears to be a man about town. That was Chris's word that I loved. So there's 0 satellites. He's in there, and that's me, Miss Smarty Pants. So he's inside the police department. And Chris plotted and figured out when in a location where there's no ability to reach satellites, it's the cell tower triangulation, right? So we know this when I'm asking these questions. And so we created a little video about this is where he is at 9. We speeded it up. Here's where he was at 7. Here's where he's at 8. Here's where he's at 9. But we know he's in the basement of the police department. They're not saying, hey, sir, I know that you're a suspect for a murder case, but you can just wander around for a few bits and then come back in. Because, they have, during that time period, you would agree that he's in the Civic Center Park. He's at the Clifford Still Museum. He's at the River Yoga Golden Triangle Studio. And he is now not happy. Oh, but we know that, how could that be if he's in the Denver Police Department? And he literally said, huh? And he said, where did you get that? Where did you get that information? Where did you get those coordinates? Those are not from my company. I never saw those before. Well, yes, sir. They're from BI. And look here, it's on your computer spreadsheet with your logo on top. And I got these from those guys, the prosecutor. Well, I don't understand this. I don't understand how you get latitude and longitude with no satellites. And so the juror has an opportunity to ask a question, and the juror says, how does ankle monitor calculate latitude and longitude when there are no satellites?
I was trying to stifle that same laughter while I was sitting there.
And so I'm going to read you this. I'm just going to read it really quickly. But so he gets off the stand, and he's very upset, and that's at the end of the day. And the next morning, I walk into the courthouse, and who's standing there waiting for me? But the senior project manager. Colette, I gotta talk to you. We're like, what are you doing here? What's going on? And he says, no, really, I figured it out. It's grabbing onto the cell towers. That's why it was 0. I gotta take the stand again. I gotta testify. I go, you talk to your prosecutor about this. And I walk into the courtroom and I say to the prosecutor, like, what up with this? And he says, well, I got an email last night from him saying, I'm devastated by the end of my testimony about the 0 satellites. I know what happened. Is there any way to let me go onto the stand to further explain? AFLT is cellular triangulation. If GPS is unavailable, we knew that. Sorry about this. Please, I've got to get back on the stand. I never produced the orange dots, because we used orange dots for the man about town. He says, I never produced the orange dots. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Sorry about this. This has happened before when defense presented data that was inaccurate and produced by their side. I never produced the orange dots. But yes, it was produced by BI, and yes, the information was accurate. Right? 2 hours of plus of cross-examination on GPS left me unable to answer these questions about location. Please, let me go back on. Is there any possibility? So he wants to rectify the situation. And so he wants to come back on the stand in the beginning. And the judge says, do you really want him back? So he says to the prosecutor. And the prosecutor says, yeah, I really want him back to explain this. And the judge said, I sustain Ms. Tvedt asking about any financial, opportunities and incentives. Ms. Tvedt, have at it. So he testifies that it's cell tower triangulation, and I asked a few questions about that. You knew that, right? That when latitude and longitude are being calculated, there's 0 satellites. You must have understood how this, as a senior product manager, that it's now grabbing onto the towers. And then I want to ask you a little bit about it's a very big business. You have multi-million-dollar contracts throughout the United States, including a multi-million-dollar contract with the Denver Police Department. It's in your best interest that they continue to buy your ankle monitor for all of these things, and that if it's not, that's a problem. And so we went into some of the financial incentives for it. And so at the end of so that was his fifth, whatever, he was on the stand for maybe 15 minutes the next day, and it didn't really do anything to further their case, but it was really critically important for me. My client testified, and the jury had to believe that, he was on ankle monitoring, that he went into this last house under duress. I'm not going to go into that, but he was in the house for 5 minutes or less when he got shot and ran out. He had no idea that this guy was going to be shooting anyone. He was devastated by it. He did a beautiful job on examination. I've never been more proud of a young man. So this was, it seemed, the judge kept saying to me, Ms. Tvedt, GPS, DNA, ballistics, what does it matter? He confessed, I'm a burglar, not a murderer. And I said, all of these things matter. They matter to the jury getting the full picture, but it really matters to my client that we understand and we can present to the jury what exactly was going on there. And so my last words, I think from both we speak together, is that never assume that the government's expert is correct in their opinions. Never assume that their demonstratives are accurate, are honest, or complete. Have the defense expert review the proposed testimony of the government witness. Have the defense expert review the government's demonstratives. Collaborate effectively. Work together. To represent your client in the most effective way. We as defense lawyers must learn. We must hire good experts. We must get what we need, ask for more, challenge, educate the fact finder, think about future cases and litigation, give my expert latitude, that's cute, isn't it? To collaborate meaningfully, and so that we can have this working relationship. It has been such a pleasure working with Chris Wells we had these 2 murder cases. He testified for cell phones, tower information in my last murder case. But all of this stuff I knew nothing about GPS monitoring. To be in a courtroom and putting John Denver's picture up in an open field and then using these circles, I would never have known to do that if I hadn't worked with Chris and kind of really brainstorm that. We need to be really confident when we go in on forensics. We have to know our topic in the science. We have to hire and work with experts to prepare for the cross-examination and potential directive digital experts. We, the lawyers, have to be the expert in the courtroom. We have to exude confidence, own the courtroom, be present, listen as they're being questioned, stand proudly with our client. My client in this case was such a good testifier that in the closing argument slides of the prosecution, when they talked about my client's testimony, they put the word coach up big. And we asked, immediately was taken down, and that's preserved for appeal. But being present And then being resilient, because we lose a lot of cases. We lose a lot of Daubert issues and motions, but even when we lose, we can use that information that we gain to cross-examine. And my final thing is take care of ourselves. A year ago, I got my 200-hour teaching certificate in yoga. And I share that with you because it was a holistic teaching where it was a lot of yoga, a lot about our koshas, a lot about the chakras, about being present, meditating. It has changed my ability to try cases. I am present when I'm in the courtroom. And oftentimes we're so crazy busy, we don't do that. Chris hikes, he bikes, he's doing the Colorado Trail this summer. And we talk about when we are in these areas of being outside, whether you're running or hiking or biking, that you get your best ideas about cross-examining experts or what you're doing and your mind is free. So take care of yourselves. This is hard work that we do. It's been a pleasure to present together today because we've spent so much time together in the last 6 months, but to share some of this stuff with you. Our contact information is present. If you have any questions on anything, never hesitate to call. Thank you so much. Namaste.